for folks who are connected to prisons, to their families, and to ensure successful reentry when community members come home. I am committed to continuing the fight for equal justice and public safety each and every day. Thank you to all of you for participating in the Digital Quest for Democracy 2021 and for inviting me to be in this arena with you. Thank you.
It is so important that we push the larger society to reckon with our history of racial inequality. We are not free in this country because we're burdened by a long history of racial injustice, racial inequality, and we haven't confronted many things that must be confronted, which is why I'm so grateful to all of you for pushing for an end to the exception clause to slavery. We haven't talked about things we need to talk about. We are a post-genocide society. What we did to indigenous people when Europeans came to this continent was a genocide. We killed millions through famine and war and disease, and we justified it by creating a narrative of racial difference. We said those natives, they're savages, and we use that kind of rhetoric to exclude them from the promise of equality and just treatment, and we use that same narrative of racial difference to justify 2.5 centuries of slavery. And the great evil of American slavery wasn't involuntary servitude, it wasn't forced labor, it was this false idea, this narrative that black people aren't as good as white people, that black people aren't fully human, black people are less evolved, black people are less capable, less worthy, less deserving. And we never confronted that narrative. It created an ideology of white supremacy. And when you read the 13th Amendment, it talks about ending involuntary servitude and ending forced labor, but says nothing about ending this white supremacy, this racial hierarchy. You had abolitionists before the Civil War that were committed to ending slavery, but not committed to racial equality. And so when that exception clause was proposed, when we actually said we're not going to abolish slavery entirely, we're going to abolish it except for people convicted of crimes, no one objected like they should have. Because we actually bought into that idea of racial hierarchy, and we've used the legal system to sustain these conditions and circumstances. It was convict leasing, then it was terrorism and lynching, and now it's mass incarceration. So it is urgent, it is necessary that we confront this language, that we commit to kind of truth and justice. It's the 21st century, it's 2021. It should not be controversial, it should not be debated that we want a total and complete abolition of slavery. There should not be something that is complicated, but yet we have to fight. But it is important that we fight. These words have meaning. Many of you know the burden that is created between the phrase or the parameters of what's in the law. And so this is an era of truth and justice that we have to commit to, and ending the exception clause is an incredibly important part of how we advance truth in this country, how we resurrect truth in this country and get closer to the kind of just society that we all dream about. Thank you all, and I wish you the best.
Hello, everyone. I'm just so excited to welcome you to our webinar today. I know many of us are coming from different places, different walks of life. It's just so exciting to meet with you now. And we do want to thank our San Francisco DA, Chesa Bodine and Brian Stevenson, for being kind and sending those really important words for us to really marinate on. We also really want to do a greeting to those of you who are directly or indirectly impacted by slavery. You know, a lot of times we don't get a chance to be recognized or to have others understand what that is like. And so while this is a welcome space for everyone, we do want to make sure that we say hello to those of us who have that background. My name is Joanna Bilingi, and I am the policy manager at Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. And this week has been quite a week for us. We have engaged in our digital quest for democracy, where we organized over 600 of us who are directly or indirectly system impacted to come together, share stories, be encouraged, and really use our own voice to speak to the California legislature on issues that impact us. And for those of you who do not know what Legal Services for Prisoners with Children is, we are an organization that organizes communities impacted by the criminal justice system and advocates to release incarcerated people, to restore human and civil rights, and to reunify families and communities. So we build on public awareness of structural racism in policing the courts, and the prison system, and we advance racial and gender justice in all our work. At the helm of our organization is my executive director, Dorsey Nunn. He also welcomes you this afternoon for some, and I guess for most of us, we could say this afternoon, but again, to our partners all over the world, we're so happy to have you. But he has really done a wonderful job of encouraging us to stand up and to speak out. Today, we're going to be joined by some of his esteemed colleagues, and we're so excited to introduce you to who those are in just a moment. I do want to share with you that one of the beautiful points of today is the fact that we get a chance to launch our campaign here in California entitled Abolishing Bondage Collectively. So what is that? I am so glad you asked. Well, our goal here is to remove Article 1, Section 6 exceptions clause from the California Constitution legislatively by way of the political franchise of voting, and to support the national work that's removing this exceptions clause from the United States Constitution. So ABC, the purpose of this and who should really think about coming on are any and all of you who are listening, right? This is a collective of individuals, of efforts, of thought leaders, of movement builders who are seeking to work with and learn from one another on the issue of involuntary servitude in California while speaking to these national efforts. And again, our focus here is to aim and highlight and center these efforts around the voices of those who are impacted by the system. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to our esteemed panelists today. Realistically, I don't need to give anyone an introduction. Many of you are very familiar with all the amazing work that everyone has done. But I do want to go ahead and share with you some of the things you may not know. And as a result, we're going to spend some time saying hi and reading our bios. That way you guys get a chance to understand really the weight of what we've got going on here. So I would be amiss not to be kind and say hello to our Dr. Davis. She's amazing. She is a matriarch. She has laid the foundation for so many of us. And I really just want to say hi here. And let me share with you a little bit about what Dr. Davis has done. So through her activism and scholarship over many decades, Dr. Angela Davis has been deeply involved in movements for social justice around the world. Her work as an educator, both at the university level and in the larger public sphere, has always emphasized the importance of building communities of struggle for economic, racial, and gender justice. Professor Davis's teaching career has taken her to San Francisco State University, Mills College, and UC Berkeley. She also has taught at UCLA, Vassar, Syracuse University, the Claremont Colleges, and Stanford University. Most recently, she spent 15 years at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where she is now a distinguished professor emerita of history of consciousness, an interdisciplinary PhD program, and of feminist studies. Angela Davis is the author of 10 books and has lectured throughout the United States, as well as Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, and South America. In recent years, a persistent theme of her work has been the range of social problems associated with incarceration and the generalized criminalization of those communities that are most affected by poverty and racial discrimination. She draws upon her own experiences in the early 70s as a person who spent 18 months in jail and on trial after being placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. She also has conducted extensive research on numerous issues related to race, gender, and imprisonment. Her recent books include Abolition, Democracy, and Our Prisons Obsolete? About the abolition of the prison industrial complex, a new edition of Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, and a collection of essays entitled The Meaning of Freedom. Her most recent book of essays is called Freedom is a Constant Struggle, Ferguson, Palestine, and the Foundations of a Movement. Angela Davis is a founding member of Critical Resistance, a national organization dedicated to the dismantling of the prison industrial complex. Internationally, she is affiliated with Sisters Inside, an abolitionist organization based in Queensland, Australia, that works in solidarity with women in prison. Like many educators, Professor Davis is especially concerned with the general tendency to devote more resources and attention to the prison system than to educational institutions. Having helped to popularize the notion of a prison industrial complex, she now urges her audiences to think seriously about the future possibility of a world without prisons and to help forge a 21st century abolitionist movement. And with that, I just want to say hello to Dr. Davis. Also on our, oh, go ahead, please, Dr. Davis.
I know I was simply going to say that it's a real honor to be a part of this panel organized by LSPC, with whom I have worked for many, many years. I can't even count the number of years. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Welcome to have you. Welcome to have you. So Dr. Dennis Childs is next up on my list here. He's an amazing individual committed to this work, and I'm going to share with you a little bit about what he has done. Dennis Childs is Associate Professor of African American Literature and affiliate faculty member of the Department of Ethnic Studies at the University of California, San Diego. He is the author of Slaves of the Stake, Black Incarceration from the Chain Gang to the Penitentiary, a work that deals with the connections between slavery and Black imprisonment from the late 19th century through today's prison industrial complex. As a scholar activist, he has worked with various social justice organizations, including the Malcolm X grassroots movement, All of Us or None, the Chicano-Mexicano Prison Project, Students Against Mass Incarceration, and Critical Resistance, for which he has served on its National Community Advisory Board. In 2015, he was a member of the first ever Prisoner Solidarity Delegation from the United States to Palestine. He is currently completing a new book, Liberation Time, Prison Industrial Genocide and the Modern Abolition Movement, that considers the degree to which racial capitalist prison slavery and policing amount to a system of anti-Black genocide against which the modern abolition movement continues to fight. So again, very esteemed, and we just want to say again, hello, and thank you for being here, Dr. Childs.
Thank you so much, Joanna, and to all the folks organizing at LSPC. It's a tremendous honor to be here with everyone.
So excited to have you, and welcome, welcome. So we have another panelist who is amazing as well. I have the privilege of getting to work with him every day. His name is Troy Williams. And let me share with you a little bit about Troy's background. Williams has served 25 years of his life in juvenile and adult prison facilities. While incarcerated, Troy Williams became a certified paralegal, founded a video and first award-winning audio production program within a prison called the San Quentin Prison Report, SQPR. Williams co-founded San Quentin's financial literacy program and FEEL philosophy, financial empowerment, emotional literacy, and served as the executive director of San Quentin's Restorative Justice Interfaith Roundtable. After paroling in 2014, Williams served on the Alameda County's Probation Chiefs Advisory Council, San Francisco's District Attorney's formerly incarcerated advisory board, Oakland's Public Safety and Services Oversight Commission, as a broad member of the Uncommon Law, the Oakland Private Industry Council, the Northern Chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, Open Gates Men's Advisory Council, and the Life Comes From It Fund Advisory Circle. Williams has worked as a youth program development specialist, restorative justice facilitator, motivational speaker, editor-in-chief of the San Francisco Bay View National Black newspaper, multimedia producer and program coordinator for RISE, Restorative, Integrated, and Self-Educated Scholars Program at Chabot College, columnist for the Oakland Post, actor, cinematographer, filmmaker, and podcast producer. In 2018, Williams was awarded a Soros Justice Fellowship, where he was working to create a national multimedia platform and community engagement program that will help formerly incarcerated people document their experiences and engage in the public. In 2020, Williams founded Restorative Media, an organization dedicated to working with formerly incarcerated and systems impacted people, taking control of their narrative. Williams is currently one of 20 journalists selected from 56 countries to participate in the Entrepreneurial Journalism Creators Program at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism. Williams recently took a position as a communications manager with legal services for prisoners with children. So with that, I do want to say, wow, you are very accomplished. It's amazing to see all the work you've done. I'm humbled by your work, and hello.
I'm just trying to catch up with the great work of all these other two panelists that I'm on. I just have to say, Angela, you know, it's been a while since I've seen you, and I am just so honored. Like this is one of the staples of my life to be on a panel with you, and I'm so honored to be here. And you know, Dr. Dennis Childs, thank you as well for being here. You know, I've read and seen a little bit of your work. Just now getting familiar with your work, but once again, I'm honored to be with you. And I have to say thank you to Dorsey Nunn for inviting me into this organization and allowing us to build in the way that we're building. You know, I came on because I definitely identify with the work of this organization. And last but not least, to all my people out there watching this webinar, we hope we do use justice and service. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Again, welcome, welcome, and we're happy that you're here. So without further ado, let's get into the thick of this, shall we? So I'm going to pose some questions and we're going to just have an honest and open conversation. And we just really want you guys to glean as much as you can. And so I'm going to start off with our first question and we're just going to go for it. So my question is this to our panelists. You know, people believe that slavery was abolished with the Emancipation Proclamation, even the 13th Amendment at the end of the Civil War. Well, given the current movement to abolish involuntary servitude and slavery within our state here in California and the prison system, can you speak on the relationship between imprisonment and slavery?
I think Dr. Davis has to take this one first.
Well, I was going to say, you're the expert in this. Well, okay, I'll start the conversation by saying that many years ago, when I myself was in jail, I heard Ruchell McGee, who was my co-defendant, referring to the uprising at the Marin County Civic Center as a slave rebellion. And I thought about it as a metaphor. And it wasn't until later that I recognized that people who were incarcerated were intensely aware of that exception clause in the Constitution. Whereas those of us who were not had learned how to ideologically suppress it. You know, we had read that phrase in the Constitution, I don't know how many times, but there had never been any serious conversation about the fact that incarceration constituted a glaring exception to the abolition of slavery. You know, first of all, I guess I would say, I think it's important that we recognize that this is a legal document. And while it's so important to work at that level, a legal proclamation does not by itself abolish an institution that is so ingrained in this country. So the exception is not really an exception to the actual abolition. It's an exception to the idea of abolition that was a part of the Constitution. I think it's so important to make that point. And also, if one looks at the ways in which the history of the punishment system in this country played out prior to, say, the more recent period where many scholar activists, you know, such as Dennis Childs, are exploring that connection. There was this sense that the history of the prison system in this country was the history of the penitentiary system as it existed, or as it was supposed to exist in the Northeast. So, you know, we had the Pennsylvania model, and we had the Auburn model, the New York model. And if one, for example, reads Foucault, Discipline and Punishment, that is the way he represents the history of punishment in this country, in order to make the point that that incarceration serves not so much as violence to the body, but rather as violence to the soul. However, what he did not take into consideration, and what so many people didn't take into consideration, was the development of the punishment system in the South in the aftermath of slavery, the convict lease system, of course, and then a penitentiary system that literally incorporated regimes of slavery. So we're not being metaphorical here. You know, we're talking about the ways in which slavery continued to exist within prison walls and in connection with the convict lease system. And of course, here we are. Let me just say, here we are in the year 2021, where finally it seems as if people are beginning to think seriously about the impact of slavery on the social, cultural, political development of the US. And I think it's so important that we not treat slavery abstractly, that we first of all recognize its connection with colonialism, and the fact that we can't, you know, talk about the racist institution of slavery without also talking about the genocide inflicted on indigenous people, the relationship between colonialism and slavery, and the ways in which they affected capitalism, the emergence of racial capitalism, I guess we would say. So I think it's so important to take advantage of this moment where finally there is a bit of a consciousness about the failure to come to grips with the impact of slavery. But there continues to be a reluctance to engage directly with people who are behind bars. And, you know, for example, the whole COVID-19 crisis, which has been more intense in prisons than anywhere else, but we're still having to make the argument that the way to address this is to release people, let people go, you know, free those who are inside. And let me stop there. That's what I have to say at the moment.
Thank you. And Dr. Childs, were you open to weighing in next?
Sure, and I'll just, you know, reiterate what Mr. Williams said a minute ago, just the honor it is to be here, you know, and thank you to LSPC and all the organizers, and Joanna and all the work you've done, and Dorsey. You know, it's just an honor. And Mr. Williams, I've started to become familiar with your work, your journalistic work, your work, you know, as an activist and organizer, and your cataloging of your own experience in places like San Quentin. I actually taught a literature class there years ago, and I learned more than I taught there. You know, it was actually a learning experience for me, and I summarily got basically ejected from that program because of how much I was connecting with folks on the inside there. So it's an honor to be here with you. And then, you know, Dr. Davis, you know, there are no words to express how important your work has been for my own trajectory as a scholar and an activist. And I'll just say that, you know, when I wrote my first book, Slaves of the State, the first quote that's in that book is from you. And that quote is exactly what you just laid out at the beginning of your comments today, which was the, you know, the critique of Foucault and the blind spot within his work. You can read that whole work, Discipline and Punish, and not see the word slavery even one time. Or, as you said, you know, indigenous genocide, settler colonialism. And So I think it's a transgressive act to claim the past as not having passed. I think of Jamaica Kincaid's, the Antiguan writer's words to that effect, that for Black people and other historically oppressed peoples, the past is not dead. She said, history is like an open wound that reopens with every breath. And I always just, that is a refrain in my head as we, see the latest news every day, it seems, of another Black person and another brown person, another indigenous person, poor person getting murdered by the state here in the United States. And then of course, by the United States doing the same kind of action around the world, the treatment of migrant peoples in Mexico, Honduras, and all over the Western Hemisphere, and people trying to immigrate from Africa. So I just think it's a very transgressive act to claim the connection between the past and the present, and not to say that they're exactly the same, but to just listen. You mentioned Rochelle McGee, Dr. Davis. He was one of the first persons that I read that made this connection. Mr. Williams, I heard you say on a presentation you gave, there's no professor that can tell me or any other prisoner what it is to be inside a cage for 20 some odd years. And I heard that when I was a grad student in 1998 at the founding conference of critical resistance. I heard that coming from family members and people on the inside. And I tried to really be respectful of that. And so suffice it to say that everything that I've learned, nearly everything that I've learned about the connections between prison slavery now and the early versions of it, chain gangs, convict leasing, and the original slavery, chattel slavery, has come from prisoners themselves, or those who Joy James calls imprisoned intellectuals. And there's this one phrase that Dr. Davis used in her early work that really affected me, and I felt like really resonated, which was, we're dealing with a transition from the prison of slavery to the slavery of prison. A transition from the prison of slavery to the slavery of prison. So the first thing is, slavery was actually a carceral institution. That's what I take from that. And so, so the barracoons, the slave pens, the slave ships and plantations that African peoples had to endure in that genocidal regime were carceral spaces. And then the second thing is that, the slavery of prison. So, as was said earlier, the move to convict leasing. And I think of a woman like a Black woman from Laronia, Georgia, who wrote President Theodore Roosevelt in 1903. Mentha Morrison was her name. And she cataloged how her and her husband were at a place called Smithonia in Georgia, run by a former Confederate colonel named James Smith. Smithonia was the name of this plantation. And he was charged with running the convict lease system for the state of Georgia and holding people in peonage. So Mentha Morrison talks about in her letter to the President of the United States in 1903, it's an amazing document. And she says, we're subjected to inhuman punishment by this man and this system, and we are being treated as slaves. So I want you to do something about that. And as Dr. Davis said, we're here in 2021, and now it's just getting to the point where, in terms of public discourse, we can really have this conversation in more channels than just our choir of people that have been working on this for years. So it's important. But just the last thing I'll say is that, okay, Laronia, Georgia, but also Pelican Bay, also Chowchilla, also Valley State, also CIW Corona for Women, also Attica, Jackson Prison in Michigan. So we don't want to, as we're having this conversation, exceptionalize the South. As Malcolm X said, anytime you're south of the Canadian border, you're South. And I think of George Jackson saying, as he went through nearly 8 years of solitary confinement in California, my recall is nearly perfect. I've lived through the passage, died on the passage, cotton and corn growing out of my chest. And as Dr. Davis was saying, he was not speaking metaphorically. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
Ooh, I guess that leaves me, huh? So yes, I guess the first thing that pops in my mind is that, like, when I do make that statement, Dr. Childs, it's never to negate the the expertise, like the expertise that's on this panel, like right now, is only to suggest or inclusion into the conversation. You know, I was very unaware of the system of things that were in place to drive me towards this thought frame of believing I had to like be a certain way in the community, that I had to function a certain way, and these ways led me into a mentality that led me to prison. I was very unaware of these system of things that applied that pressure. And it wasn't until I walked into the prison with the life sentence and I began studying the law. And one of the gentlemen in there was one of my mentors, if you will, in me studying the law. And he came over and he handed me a copy of the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution and told me, "Welcome to the new slave ship." And he walked off. And as a young man, I was pissed. Like, I didn't know how to really take it, what he was telling me. And I was, but I knew I had to understand, and I knew I needed his tutelage to understand. Right. Um, and I studied, I studied all of these things that are in place that I watch. So I like to speak from my experience. And I think what I often suggest is qualifies me as a seat at the table is not just the fact that I've undergone an experience, but also my ability to communicate that experience. And so I sit and I've watched throughout my incarceration. I watched somebody say, "Well, no, I'm not going to work. I don't want to work for y'all." And I watched the oppressor and the punitive measures get put in place because this person refused to go clean toilets inside of the prison for somebody else. I myself spent my last 8 years of incarceration, and a lot of people don't know this because the image of prison that you have is that everybody is just doing some kind of menial labor, but we really don't understand the type of intelligence that we are actually have locked away. And I watched myself. I got paid 37 cents an hour to be a video technician for the prison. I watch our fighters like fight fires and risk their lives up and down the state of California and come home and can't get a job at the very task that they were qualified to do while they were rated. I sit here, even just this morning, somebody sent me a link to a gentleman on Twitter who was bragging about the money that he was making having invested in the prison industrial complex and how people are led down this complex. So there is this way in which we have begun to understand nowadays, thanks to the 13th, thanks to scholars like yourselves, thanks to the enormous amount of people who are coming home from incarceration and are sharing these stories and giving their experiences to their family and to others. We have learned about this system. I was able to go into Angola, and if you really want to understand, speaking of the South, if you really want to understand the plantation to prison, go visit Angola. You will see 18,000 acres of a plantation dressed up like a modern day prison. Right? It's there. It's right here before our eyes. But the fact that we have been sort of conditioned not to see it. We all were told in school that slavery got abolished. And in some cases, we were even read the 13th Amendment. But this exception clause did not jump out at us in the way that is jumping out at us now. Right. And I think that is a part that and I love when I hear Dr. Davis talk, and I was just writing something similar to what you were saying this morning, and I'd be like, yes, you're like my barometer. And I'm like, yes, I'm on the right path. Because I was just thinking that or writing that this morning about how, and you put it in way better words than I could, but my thought frame was around how we've been conditioned not to see the truth that's standing right before us. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Wow, this is powerful. And so thank you for sharing this. I'm getting this sense of what it really means to be enslaved. And again, what that really looks like and how, again, this lack of freedom, this lack of autonomy. And, we talk about CDCR, and we always look at that R, rehabilitation. And what I'm hearing here is that there's a lack of rehabilitation. Even if you want to call it rehabilitation, we're seeing slavery, this, like, as Dr. Davis mentioned, it's, hitting the soul, right? So I want to ask us, as far as getting the context together, can we talk a little bit about Jim Crow and how this pattern of getting individuals who are formally considered slaves, who were formally removed from slavery, again, allegedly based on the Emancipation Proclamation and, post-war amendments, then translates into today. So in 2017, according to the Prison Policy Initiative here in California, 28.5% of the state's male prisoners were actually African American, compared to just 5.6% of the state's adult male residents. The imprisonment rate for Latino and Chicano men were also much higher than those of heritage that was, that is white, frankly. And so when we look at these numbers, when we think about who has been enslaved, even in California itself, looking at what happened with the railroad, with our Asian friends, looking at, our indigenous friends and seeing what happened there, we understand that there is and has been this pattern of lack of autonomy and a targeted approach to the individuals who have been used to have this rehabilitation or this need for rehabilitation from the system. So I'm trying to understand, maybe you guys can help me understand, what is this Jim Crow, which had a similar effect, right? And how does that impact today's, statistics as we see them? Who should I choose? Dr. Davis, can we go with you?
Okay, well, I suppose I should start off, since I think I may be the only person on the panel who actually experienced Jim Crow in my childhood. I grew up in, as I've pointed out many times, the most segregated city in the country, Birmingham, Alabama. But I don't know whether I want to talk about those experiences. What I think I should mention first is the fact that the era of Jim Crow did not have to happen. We often assume that there was this a very easy transition from slavery to Jim Crow. But that was not the case. And as a matter of fact, there was, as historians, Dennis Childs and others know, the period of radical reconstruction that immediately followed the abolition of slavery was the most radical era in the history of our country. And that, as a matter of fact, there was an enormous amount of promise during that period prior to 1877, when Black people began to be elected to state legislatures, when state constitutions became more progressive. And not only for Black people, but around gender issues as well, when education became public as a consequence of Black people's fighting for the right to education. That era has literally been erased from the collective consciousness of people in this country. And in a sense, it seems that what we're doing now in 2021 is reconnecting with the trends that were announced 150 years ago. So I just, I want to make the point that Jim Crow did not follow automatically from the efforts of former slaveholders to preserve their power, that it had a lot to do with Northern capitalists. It had a lot to do with the ways in which capitalism, the industrial capitalists of that era, wanted to move from what had been a slave economy to the best kind of wage labor economy that would increase their profits. So, you know, some of these big companies, mining companies, railroad companies, made use of the labor of convicts who were arrested precisely in order to provide labor power for the new industrial capitalists who were literally colonizing the South. I mean, of course, I'm not a historian, but I think that history, we're always haunted by our histories. And if we don't examine them, then there's no way to move forward. But Jim Crow, wow, racial segregation, white supremacy, it would almost appear as if we're reliving that era now, the era following radical Reconstruction, the overturning of radical Reconstruction, and the rise of white supremacy in the way we know it today. As you know, some, I think, who mentioned Birth of a Nation, or was that on another Zoom call that I was?
Another Zoom call, totally relevant though.
Absolutely, but I think it's so important that we, in the process of trying to collectively understand the meaning of racism, of structural racism, institutional racism, systemic racism, and the relationship to slavery, that we center the trajectory of punishment and the ways in which Jim Crow was predicated on the criminalization of Black people. So, you know, the connection between modes of punishment and the rise of a new social political system connected with the economic system of capitalism that insisted on white supremacy. And I know that, you know, Troy, thank you so much, you know, for your work and reminding us how important it is to recognize the ways in which history remains very much alive, and the worst aspects of history remain very much alive within the system of incarceration. I mean, this is one of the best arguments to abolish this mode of punishment. And I don't think we will ever extricate ourselves from the history of white supremacy unless we abolish the prison. And just finally, if we want to know the meaning of Jim Crow, of what that's all about, go into a prison. You know, look at the segregation, the regimes of segregation that still exists, that determine who gets to be whose celly, you know, who gets to be on the yard with whom. And this is a kind of cultivated white supremacy, drawing from history that makes it, of course, much easier to control those who are behind bars.
Very powerful. Dr. Childs, would you like to weigh in?
Well, Dr. Davis, maybe you were having a premonition, because the first thing that came to mind when you were speaking about the culpability of the national government in the Jim Crow Project was Birth of a Nation. And also that erasure of that period of radical Reconstruction. You know, W.B. Du Bois's Black Reconstruction is such an important text in that regard. And he talks about the non-inevitability of what he describes as a backward turn towards slavery by the end of that book. Because what does he talk about at the end of that book? The rise of the convict lease system. But as you point out, it was under, the guise of modernizing the Southern economy and taking the South, the old agrarian South, into modernity, that many of the things that we're talking about started. So you had around your hometown of Birmingham, Alabama, and the mining industry, you had companies like US Steel using neo-slave labor. And, as people like yourself, Milford Fierce, Alex Lichtenstein has this great book, Twice the Work of Free Labor, on this subject matter. It's not a return to the old slavery per se, but it's showing the way in which slavery was always about the production of capitalist modernity. It was always at the crux of that. And so, when people talk about the new Jim Crow, what we have to keep pointing our finger to is the fact that you don't have the new Jim Crow without the quote unquote old slavery. And so, the second thing I'll say is that, because by the way, Birth of a Nation, if you don't know, you should watch it and, try to struggle through it, because it's a celebration of the birth of the Ku Klux Klan. And this idea of destroying Reconstruction, which in the white supremacist mind frame was a horrible period where Black people had the nerve to assert their rights to live and to not be killed and to not be enslaved and to have an education system and a health system. And you hear that now in the panic around the 1619 Project from the right wing, because there is this holding on, this obsessive holding on to, on the part of this white supremacist state, to the same kind of hierarchy and order of power. But as Dr. Davis was saying, that's not inevitable. And so the second thing I'll just say quickly is that when I think about the new Jim Crow and its relationship to the old Jim Crow, or prison slavery now in relationship to back then, I was reminded of the case of the Turners in Georgia, who in 1918 were lynched, Hayes and Mary Turner, and this is in The Crisis, edited by Du Bois. And it's a horrifying thing where this family of sharecroppers, this couple, tried to assert their rights to the yield from their crop that was agreed to. Very common story. And Hayes Turner was lynched. And then when Mary Turner tried to seek justice for him, she was lynched, and she happened to be 8 months pregnant at the time. But what you find out when you read the stories about that is that the county sheriff led the lynching where this occurred. This was led by an officer of the law. And then when you look at lynching statistics from the 1890s and the birth of the KKK through the 1950s, you figure out that as the incidence of publicly recorded lynchings by groups like the KKK decreased from its height in 1890, the incidence of the state murdering Black people increased inversely proportional to that through execution. And that's not even including killing people on the chain gang or just through state execution through the electric chair and other means. So when you look at that X on the graph, what you figure out is that the law is culpable. The legal regime of the United States, whether it be settler colonialism, slavery, or Jim Crow, has always had a terroristic bearing towards Black, Indigenous, Brown, Asian, and poor people. And that has continued to the daily assault on us to this day. So, I mean, for whatever that's worth, but it's just, I couldn't believe you brought up Birth of a Nation, Dr. Davis, because that's exactly what I was thinking of.
And also, Dennis, you can call me Angela, by the way. I was thinking that parenthetically, it might be important to point out that when Mary Turner was lynched, the unborn baby was carved out of her stomach. So, that gender dimension to the violence of lynching is important to keep in mind, particularly since we tend to think about lynching as a phenomenon that affected men primarily. So that's just a little, parenthetical. And thank you so much for raising that.
and I think I would add to the conversation how I think the concept of Jim Crow has just taken a new form. It's just been given a different label. Um, you know, we talk about the convict leasing laws, we talk about the black codes, the vagrancy laws, things that were done in order to simply pull someone over to make contact with them and get them back on the plantation to do labor. My first interaction with law enforcement, I was 7 years old playing follow the leader with my little brothers. And I was accused of burglarizing cars, and I was 7. I didn't even know what burglarize meant. So that put a very that run-in with them validated everything my community had told me about why not to trust the police. My second run-in with the law, I was given a ticket on a bicycle because I failed to yield at a stop sign. And so I was kind of placed, I was being slowly placed into their system, right? We can look at the war on drugs. We can look at all these other laws that have been created to get people into the prison system. And this here in it of itself, in my mind, is an act of the same mentality that was used during Jim Crow in order to push us towards this system and have us inside a system working to have free labor. You know, so I think that's what I want to just add to the conversation, that in my mind, Jim Crow parallels stop and frisk. Jim Crow parallels all of these other activities that are done to make contact with people for no other reason, where the outcome winds up with them being involved in the system in some kind of way.
Thank you for that. And so I'm hearing this theme of, you know, the social political context of these things happening. Even Birth of a Nation, part of its hype included the fact that you now had something to watch. You know, this is the beginning of the film industry in some ways. And so there's the social political context that's happening. And so throughout this entire movement from then until now, we see that we are working towards the social political construct as well as, you know, the law and that sort of thing. And so as has been mentioned, you know, Jim Crow has a different name. So Mr. Williams, thank you for sharing that. And Dr. Davis, you also mentioned that Jim Crow didn't need to happen. I think that's a huge takeaway. A lot of us think, oh, it was this natural, you know, move. People didn't know what else to do. No, it was a very intentional opportunity that was taken to, again, perpetuate this institutional, structural, and systemic version of racism. So I want to ask our panelists, based on, again, understanding these components of, again, the social political aspects, the law, I want to ask, how does the movement to stop the exploitation of prisoners' labor fit into the overall movement towards divestment from private prison contracts, de-incarceration, depolicing, and our abolition as a whole?
Oops. Let me see. Well, I guess I guess I should initiate the conversation. Again, that's a complicated question. It's complicated because, you know, first of all, it involves the way in which prison labor unfolds and the resistance to it. So I want to actually begin by pointing out that many people may not be aware of the whole history of labor struggles behind walls. And of course, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the assassination of George Jackson that took place at a time when there were uprisings in prisons all over the country, the organizing that took place in Folsom, the Attica prison revolt that took place shortly after his assassination, which is why people on the outside came to develop an interest in acknowledging the social justice dimension of struggles around imprisonment and eventually abolition. The call for abolition was raised during the Attica prison rebellion. And so I think it's really important, since we're talking about history, to pay tribute to the historical contributions of people behind bars. And I want to point to especially the work of the California Prisoners Union. And if one goes back and looks at all of the elements of their agenda, one sees this really powerful statement of why the labor movement writ large, the labor movement in the so-called free world, should have actually developed an alliance with those who were struggling to unionize behind bars. I'm remembering also a very important legal case out of North Carolina, in which Thurgood Marshall wrote a dissenting opinion arguing for the right of prisoners to unionize. And of course, where are we 50 years later? That issue is still very much on the table. But of course, prisoner labor is very lucrative. It's lucrative in so many different ways, as Troy was pointing out. The various fire departments, the California, what is it called? The Forestry Fire Department, which fights these terrible fires that we have in the state of California, which are becoming worse as a result of the climate crisis and the attacks on the environment. It's prisoners who are in the forefront and the front ranks of those efforts to save the state of California. And as Troy pointed out, after all of this experience, it would seem to mean that they're precisely the people that the California Forest Fire Department should encourage to join them when they get out, because they have more experience than anyone else. It's just absolutely ridiculous. I do want to say that it might be important to link the question of prisoner labor to the larger impact of capitalism, global capitalism, on mass incarceration. And of course, when we first began to think about organizing a movement against the prison industrial complex, what we tried to center was the impact of global capitalism on not only the US, and not only the global North, but what was happening in the global South as well. The creation of surplus populations because of the withdrawal of services that are designed to meet the public good. In the global South, the shifting of capital from public service, from public sector areas to more profitable areas, the insistence on profit as a condition for loans from the IMF, for example. And why is it that within such a short period of time, so many prisons were built in this country, so many people were incarcerated, especially people of color, Black people, Latinx populations, and indigenous people still, I think, have the highest per capita rate of incarceration in the country. You know, why did this happen during the 80s? It happened because of the retooling of the whole global economic system, so that neoliberal ideals could be instituted, so that which was not profitable could be removed, and that everything could be subject to the dictates of profit. And so, of course, without these public services, what are people going to do? And at the same time, as these industries were moved to other parts of the world, deindustrialization, what were people going to do who had jobs in steel, who had jobs in auto, who had jobs in mining? What were they going to do? Well, there was nothing to save them. And so the prison became a place where this surplus population, rendered surplus, came to be deposited. So, I mean, the point that I'm making is that regardless of whether we're talking about public or private prisons, the whole system is related very much to the development of capitalism. And I do think it's important to insist on insist on understanding the ways in which private capital are very much influencing incarceration, especially with respect to immigrant detention facilities, because immigrant detention constitutes the most profitable sector of the private prison industry. And so, you know, let's not forget that there are these aspects of the prison industrial complex that don't necessarily involve what we think of as the traditional forms of incarceration in city, county jails and state and federal prisons. But let's keep that in mind because it's all a part of the same structure that requires us to think about the systemic character of racism. Those structures of racism are related to the structures of capitalism.
Can I just jump in there? You know, what you were just saying, Angela, just made me think of, I think you may have even ran this quote in Our Prisons Obsolete or another text, but Ray-Luc Levasseur, when he says that we are, as prisoners, human waste, you know, and that idea of a surplus, the creation of a surplus population. And then the remarkable aspect of it, which is all of these macroeconomic things that you mentioned, deindustrialization and the removal of living wages while CEO pay is going up astronomically, the real minimum wage going down in the 70s and 80s to now, and then blaming the people that are living the predictable outcomes of those decisions from on high and criminalizing them for living those predictable outcomes of gross asymmetries as to wealth, land, jobs, education, healthcare, and the like, and you know, the low-hanging fruit that then you can turn that situation into another profit matrix. And also, you know, implicit in what you're saying is I'm writing this book now on the idea of prison industrial genocide, which is to say that it's not, you know, creating piles of corpses in the way that we think of it, but it is a situation where a kind of solution to the problem of a surplus population can be these neo-plantations. That also includes, you know, during the Obama era, the legislation was passed that said that 30,000 migrant subjects need to be in cages every single day. This is while he was deporting 2.5 million people under his two administrations. And he had, unfortunately, the president of my university, our university, Angela, currently Janet Napolitano, as his lieutenant in that process as the head of Homeland Security. But 30,000 prisoners a day, migrants a day, had to be locked up. And if they didn't reach that quota, the federal government, the private prison companies that owned those people, those migrants that they were about to deport, could sue the federal government for profit loss. So the commodification of human beings across borders, the way in which that process of deindustrialization meant maquiladora systems south of the United States that exploit and terrorize people. I live here in San Diego, and we have this horrific system of wage slavery and eco violence against brown people south of the border here. And then again, criminalizing those that are reacting to NAFTA and all of these neoliberal regime decisions for trying to get to a place where they can live a better life. So that's number one. And number two, I would just say that in talking about the issue of labor, that we not forget that when we talk about neo-slavery and prison slavery, it's not reduced to that category of what we would call productive labor. I mean, Victoria's Secret and all these companies using prison labor, phone companies profiting from it, as Angela said, private prisons, but most prisoners are in state prisons and local, like state-run jails and prisons. And the type of labor that is not productive, the very things that keeps the prison running, cleaning, clerking, making the food, all of that. But then there's the other elements of neo-slavery, the gendered violence against women in places like CIW, Corona, California, where Shailene Graves in 2016 was found hanging in her cell, and her family believes that was a lynching. Erica Rocha in the same year found hanging in her cell. The highest suicide rate of any prison in the country is CIW, Corona. The California Coalition for Women Prisoners has done great work on that. And thinking about the process of forced sterilization at that same facility from 2006 to 2010, over 100 women submitted to that. And the regime of the prison industrial complex being a regime of legal kidnapping. I've worked with folks who have dealt with, say, women in the county jail in LA who, before even being convicted of a crime, have their children taken away from them, and then the family never gets the child back again. That is a vestige of slavery as well. That kind of process of destroying familial and community connections. I'm thinking of Micaiah Bryant's case in Columbus, Ohio recently, murdered by the police while she was in the foster system. So it's not just official prisons, it's also foster care. 80% of prisoners in the United States, over 2 million people right now, are former foster youth. But those former foster youth were removed from their families. I mean, Dorothy Roberts writes about this and others. This process of legal kidnapping under the guise of social services. So this spectrum of what we're talking about shows that slavery is more, number one, than productive labor. It is white supremacy, as everyone has been saying. It is terrorism and menacing of whole populations and communities under the guise of protecting and serving. It would make Orwell blush what has happened during these years, but that's it for now.
And I think what I will add to the conversation is that it's no secret that government has always worked alongside of the corporations that were involved in slavery, the people and the corporations that were involved in slavery. And so this continues. So whether we're talking private prisons or state-ran prisons, it's one and the same. But I was just looking, and I'm not going to use a name because I definitely don't want to give credence to this person who posts this, but this person posts that in 4 years, he turned 7.5 million into a clean $150 million. He said that by year 4, class flows were 15 million at 95% occupancy, right? And he's talking about running private prisons. So just the whole concept of us as a people, and by people, I'm referring to Black, Latin people, anybody involved in this system, we have continued to be a commodity. Even in Michelle Alexander, who has quoted as talking about how there are actually more people, Black people in prison today than there were slaves in 1850, just some 13, 15 years prior to the so-called Emancipation Proclamation. So the commodity of human beings, right, has to stop, right? If people are incarcerated, people still need a living wage. People still need to know that, that they're coming home to an opportunity to be successful. Now, during my incarceration, I was, in some cases, I've seen people treat their animals better than what they treated the human beings on the yard. I was in a cell that if you put your animal in it and left him in there for too long, the animal cruelty society or whomever is going to come, like, give you a knock on your door about animal cruelty. But it's okay to put two human beings in a cell that I can't even spread my arms across, right? And so oftentimes sitting in that cell, I would think about how our ancestors was packed in slave ships, right? Like we're packed on prison yards, and people are making money. People are living the good life off the suffering of others, right? Off the suffering of human chattel still to this day. And so when we start talking about, like, the need to stop the exploitation of prison labor, I asked the question, as I did in my TED talk: why is it that somebody was willing to pay nearly $1 million to keep me in prison, but upon my release would only give me 200 to ensure my success? Right? Follow the money. Right?
Well,
Can I just add something right there on that?
absolutely, absolutely.
Following what Troy just said, I just worry with this last question about, stopping the exploitation of prisoners' labor. Angela mentioned the California Prisoners Union earlier and the wonderful work, and I'm thinking about the latest national prison strike and against prison slavery. But just for us to be cautious that the goal here is not better working conditions for people while they're inside the conditions Troy was just talking about. The goal is to free our people, and for labor rights and a living wage to happen while people are with their loved ones, not in cages like that. So, the labor issue is important, but not losing sight of that broader abolitionist goal that we have as a movement.
No doubt. And I thank you for that. Just because I would definitely not want that to be my position. That's my argument. Like what I do now, and I get it. But I thank you for that clarification, because we don't want anybody in this audience to even assume that is a position that we're coming from. Our goal is to keep our little ones, our loved ones, and all of humanity outside of these walls that do us no good.
And I just want to, add a little coda that as this is a good example of what we call non-reformist reforms, a change that will lead us in the direction of abolition. So I think you're absolutely right. We don't want to create the kinds of changes that makes the institution more permanent and make it appear more humane than it actually is. Our goal is to get rid of imprisonment as the mode of punishment used by this society.
Oh, this is great. Thank you for sharing these things. And, sometimes folks think of, moving out of the system and moving to get our people free as a way of not considering public safety. And that's always so frustrating. to hear, because I am part of the public and I should feel safe as well. So my question as we wrap up here, this will be a third and final question, is do you believe when we have these conversations that folks are actually understanding we're talking about prisoners as people and humans? Do you see that, the changes through your life, things that you've experienced through your own lives, in terms of this public reception of the prison abolition movement really understands the humanity that is our brothers and sisters, our friends, our family members, as was mentioned, even folks who have amazing intellectual capability that are now behind bars, So I just want to ask again, from your experience, from the things you've seen, do you believe, that we are seeing prisoners as human? And just maybe talk a little bit about your personal experience towards the reception of the public to the abolition movement.
Okay. I'm still kind of in shock that we are engaged in all of these public conversations about abolition. I never expected that that I would experience this moment. And of course, this isn't to say that we've moved forward. It is to say that the work that people have done over the last 5 decades has actually made a difference. And let's not assume that this so-called racial reckoning, or all of the terms that are being used to describe this moment, let's not assume that this happened by itself. Of course, this is a particular kind of conjuncture that resulted from the COVID-19 pandemic and the awareness of the rising collective awareness of the structural character of racism, at the same time that we all got to witness this state lynching of George Floyd and of Breonna Taylor and all of these other cases that had that happen in the absence of people involved in organizing and activists and intellectual work over the last decades, there would not have been any kind of a transformation. The moment would have been lost. And I mention this because I think it's so important to emphasize that the work we do makes a difference. We may not see that difference the next day or the next year or the next 10 years. Sometimes it takes 50 years. But what we are witnessing now, I think, are the consequences of that work. And what has been produced is another possibility. And it means that now that we can engage in open conversations about abolition, now that many people, maybe half the people in this country, seem to be getting it, that when we say we're for abolition, it doesn't mean that we don't want safety and security. It means that we need to develop other ways, nonviolent methods of producing safety and security, because the institutions that are offered to us as the pathway towards safety and security are precisely the ones that militate against the possibility of safety and security. So I think it's really wonderful now. There's a national movement to get cops off campus. Who could have imagined such a thing 5 years ago? But again, these are potentials, these are possibilities. And I can't emphasize enough that there are new possibilities for doing work that will make a difference. And if we don't confront and work on those possibilities, then we can experience something like what happened with the rise of the Ku Klux Klan in the aftermath or during radical Reconstruction and the overturning of that moment of possibility. So I'm very excited, but I do think it's important that we recognize that movements express themselves in so many different ways. They're the spectacular, the dramatic ways with people in the streets and marching and demonstrating, as we saw last summer. But then there's also the work that has to happen that is not so dramatic, that is not so visible. The constant work to transform the institutions that we have contact with. And I think we're in such a moment now, a moment that requires the kind of organizing that will hopefully eventually make abolition of prisons, abolition of the police a reality.
If I could just pick up from there, I remember teaching as a grad student in the late 90s at Berkeley and taking some of the stuff I was learning from Angela and Ruth Wilson Gilmore and others in the movement, and Assata Shakur into the classroom, and the kinds of reactions that I would get. And I know Angela and Troy, you're probably tired of these kind of reactions when you give these talks. They still happen, but they happen with much more frequency in the late 90s, where the prison had become so naturalized that they were scandalized by the idea of there being no prisons more than they were by the prison industrial complex. And, fast forward to today, and now on my campus, there's the Stop Cops on Campus thing that is linked with the national movement. I had students start this group, Students Against Mass Incarceration, on campus. But what Angela said struck me is that it's not about the demonstration of the movement. It's about the grinding, slow grinding, plodding work, Joanna, that I know you do every day, and others, and all of us are none. I remember sitting around a table with people like Rita Bo Brown in Oakland at the Prison Activist Resource Center and filling envelopes for hours and thinking to myself, is this ever gonna do anything? Are we ever gonna get to the point where we can have this conversation out in the open the way we want to? And as we've said today, here we are. But then there's also what is it? Amilcar Cabral said, claim no easy victories. So you have the right wing at the same time that they're panicking about 1619, talking about prison reform. I mean, that last clown that held the office in DC, trying to act like he's a prison reformer. And all I'll just say is that, imagine Harriet Jacobs or Mary Prince or Frederick Douglass going to a meeting and hearing about how we need to reform the slave plantation system. That would be an abomination, and it should be an abomination to us. And so in that vein of the long struggle and not mistaking the demonstration for the movement, and knowing that as much as we've gained, there's exponentially more that we need to do in the name of I know, Troy, you have brothers that are still on lock, and sisters and brothers throughout the country, and also in places like Palestine, because the prison industrial complex, as Angela always says, and Ruthie, is global. And so what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank with US militarism and carceral systems is a part of the prison industrial complex as well. And so, it's the words of Fannie Lou Hamer, none of us are free until all of us are free. And we have to maintain that mantra as we give ourselves a little bit of DAP for what we've gained in the struggle so far.
It is because of what has been gained in the struggle is the reason why I'm free. And I say this holding in a lot of emotion because I wasn't promised to ever be back out here again. And I was buried in a box and expected to stay there until I passed away. So as to whether or not certain people see us as human or not, that's less, I guess, of a concern than it is knowing that the people that do see me for who I am and what I'm able to contribute to this society were the people that lifted me up. Whether all the people that's been in this struggle, that's been fighting for change, the jailhouse lawyers who filed writ after writ that opened up gateways to that man named Black who taught me the truth about my history beyond slavery. Right? These are the people that woke my mind up so that I could put myself in a position to no longer feed the beast. Right? So some of us are here to actually like to fight the system and to, rid this system of its, white supremacist, we got to lock everybody up and get paid off of their backs. And then there's this other work that needs to be done where we are on the block working with our young ones who may not be on the college campus to make sure that they're aware of the systematic things that are in place to throw them on the plantation. And so I say this with all the love for my homeboys that I grew up with and for their kids and for my young ones that's out there on the block. Like, I love y'all. And we got to have some real change so that we stop feeding this beast and that we get on this side, because the thing is that we're strong in numbers, right? And because so many people came together, the stars just lined up for me and allowed me to come home. And I know I'm repeating the same thing, but it's because of your work. Angela, it's because of that. It's because of that court case that you won, that you were so eloquently. I was telling my mother, talking to my mother, I said, Mom, I'm gonna be on stage with Angela Davis. And my mother was like, what? She got all excited and she just went in about how intelligent you were to fight that court case. The way that you did, the way that you eloquently spoke and you put the system on trial, right? And so that's one thing that spirit, like, is a spirit that is in me now because I watched you, right? And I watched the work of Professor Childs. I'm learning his work. I watched the work of all these formerly incarcerated people who have come home. Shout out to Dorsey. I got a whole bunch of different names I could call up and down this state, up and down this country about the work that's being done. It's because of their work that I'm able to sit right here, right now on this panel and fight with you all against this system. So I'm thankful.
Joanna, can I say one thing?
By all means.
Forgot to mention, which I think is really important, and listening to Troy reminds me that, and of course, Dennis has done an enormous amount of research that is connected to and based on the intellectual work of people behind bars. And so it's not only a question of humanizing people who are in prison, it's also a question of recognizing that so many of them have the capacity to help change the world and will be so much better than that than anybody who currently inhabits the free world. So this is another really strong argument for abolition, precisely because of the failures of the system of punishment and incarceration. So many people who manage to survive it are people who learn how to cultivate their own capacity to learn and to produce knowledge and to experience freedom in the realm of the mind, because that's really the only way you can survive these terrible places. And we need that expertise, especially now that we're confronting racism and trying to imagine what a different society, a society without white supremacy might look like. And I think that it's so important to emphasize the intellectual contributions of people who are behind bars, and the fact that we need to free them. Of course, we need to free them because they need to be free, but collectively, as all the people who inhabit this planet, we need the expertise that has been developed by our sisters and brothers and trans comrades, gender nonconforming comrades behind bars.
I really, really, really love the empowerment that's coming from this. You know, as has been mentioned, you know, we all have these individual experiences that come together into this collective, and you know, we shouldn't be overlooking anyone. You know, everyone is important to this movement, and we really want to drive that home. And so, as far as wrapping up and driving anything home, I want to ask our panelists, is there anything else that you want to share, or you want folks to take away from our time today?
I'll start. I just want to say that, again, it's been a tremendous honor. And thank you, Joanna and Dorsey and Mark and everybody with LSPC and All of Us or None and all affiliated organizations. And thank you for everyone for attending. And you know, my co-panelists, it's really an honor. This has been really informative for me and actually bolstering to my spirit. You know, if I can just say that personally. You know, I just wanted to end by saying that, you know, the last question that we were dealing with the human, and you know, Troy, I really heard what you said. You know, yeah, there's the people that don't want to recognize my humanity, but I'm going to focus on those that's never been a question. I think that that's really important. But at the same time, I was also reminded of Letitia Widman's speeches, you know, after Jacob Blake was nearly murdered by police. And one thing that she said really struck me, you know, because of what Angela was just saying about the intellectual work of our communities that doesn't get recognized as such. The way in which she turned the individuated thing of her brother being nearly killed into a collective story. She said, you know, I'm a student of Black history. She said, you know, what happened to me and my family connects me in a family way to Emmett Till, to Philando Castile, to Sandra Bland. And then she said, what I want everybody to recognize who's listening to this and watching this is that my brother is a father, he's a brother, he's a community member, but most importantly, he's a human being. And if we want to talk about the new Jim Crow as a representation of the undead nature of the old slavery, you know, that's what I was trying to say about the laborer piece earlier. It's not, as Angela said at the beginning, slavery is the thing that, along with indigenous genocide, that makes the United States what it is as a settler colonial slaveocracy. So it's not, it's everywhere. It's in every aspect of the way in which the governance and capitalism works in this country. And so the analysis by the Letitia Widmans of the world and the Sylvia Winters of the world of the way in which the technique of white supremacy basing itself on the fable of our non-humanity, and the way in which prisoners at the 0 degree of being commodified humans have given us the language to not only offer a counter narrative to that, but to conceive of our own vision of an abolitionist future. Thinking about people like Derek Bell writing about these things, and as critical race theory is being castigated in the public media, knowing that the reason why it's being castigated is the same reason Bill Clinton got rid of the Pell Grant for prisoners, which is they know that our folks that are being dealt with in the most horrifying way in terms of warfare are the ones that are the leaders of movements for social transformation. So I just want to say that I feel, again, completely energized by this conversation and ready to, you know, do more of that work with all of y'all.
I guess I'll just jump in and this may sound a little bit cliche, but thank you, Mom. I I'm just thankful for and what like I say that jokingly, but really the truth is it's just a reminder of the unconditional love that someone showed me and the unconditional love I have for my people. Right. I just think it's so important that all of us out here in society that join the movement, like join the movement, get active. There's enough organizations and people and things that are going around, like, connect with us on this, our efforts to abolish this bondage collectively, right? Join it, like connect with us. Let's sit down, let's have some conversation, let's have some talks and figure out how do we move forward collectively in a way that benefits us all, right? And it can be done, like it can be done. And I'll just close by once again just showing my deep appreciation and gratitude for being here, for being on this panel. Somebody take a screenshot. I am really like thankful for this opportunity. I joke around, y'all, when I'm nervous.
No, you're doing great. We love it. And we're so grateful for your energy. That's awesome. And
Let's free
Mark will
Mumia.
get screenshot.
Let's not forget to say that we have to free Mumia Abu Jamal and Leonard Peltier and all of our elders and everyone else as well.
Yes. Whew. We got to free our elders. I love that. I love that. Well, we do want to thank all of you for participating. Dr. Davis, it has been amazing to hear your voice live and to communicate with you. Dr. Childs, you are always on point, always kind, always persevering, super grateful for you. And Mr. Troy Williams, you're always amazing, funny, comedic, and always straight and to the point. You always bring home the heart of what is going on. And I think that's so important to the work that we do. So I want to share a couple things with you all before we hop off here, but I do want to thank our panelists for participating. You guys are near and dear to our hearts, so we'll continue to have our relationship and we'll talk with you offline. I also want to thank everyone who's attended in all the different time zones. I know it's a lift for some of you who are a little later, but we're thankful that you guys participated. We also want to say a special thank you to those who have, again, direct or indirect system impact. That's huge. That's huge. And we're grateful for what you can share with us. And we want to remember everything that you have been through is not for nothing. You're welcome and we appreciate having you home. And for those of us who have loved ones who are not yet home or friends or members of the community, I want you to leave here remembering to give hope, remembering to reach out, remembering to continue the fight for them. I also want to thank Mark Fujiwara. He's our silent strength behind the tech, and it can be difficult running technology. And so I just want to thank him for all of his efforts. And All of Us or None has been a staple for so many of us. And All of Us or None is actually a project of LSPC that helps with organizing and bringing us to the table. I also want to thank our fellowship program. This fellowship program has provided us the space where we have First Fridays, which aims to uplift the political advocacy and organizing education of our fellows at LSPC. We've also partnered with the Underground Scholars Initiative with UC Berkeley under the leadership of Azadeh Zarabi, who's kindly allowed us to incorporate some UC Berkeley fellows in our program. So this is excellent. We're so happy that you guys have provided us this space. And of course, we want to remind everyone to get involved, right? So we'll send you a post-event email so that way all the information that comes, you don't have to keep at the front of your mind right now. You can have it written down for you. But we want you to join and engage and bring anyone and everyone who's doing anything in California to abolish bondage collectively, right? And again, our goal here is to remove Article 1, Section 6, the exceptions clause here in California legislatively, or through a ballot initiative, which may be coming, and support the national work to remove the exceptions clause through the work in our state. Again, this is a collective of individuals, of efforts, organizations, thought leaders, and movement builders who are seeking to work with and learn from each other on this issue of involuntary servitude here in California. while speaking to these national efforts. And again, we aim to focus the voices of those who are impacted by the system in these efforts. And so lastly, I really want to share, we were so excited to work with Freedom United, which has offered us a statement for you guys to read. So I'll make sure to include that in our post-event email. But I do want to share with you that they are amazing. They are global. And a lot of the context of what has been shared today has also highlighted the global work that is involuntary servitude. And so I'm going to share with you what they've shared with me and offer that we are partnering with them to start and continue this campaign. And so they have shared this. So Freedom United represents the world's largest community dedicated to ending human trafficking and contemporary forms of slavery. And so Freedom United equips millions of supporters with awareness, education, and ways to take action that drive real change towards the goal of ending human rights abuses. So one specific way that they take action is through campaign work, all of which is centered on global petitions that are signed by citizens all over the world demanding change from the government. So since last year, Freedom United has been actively working to tackle forced labor within the prison industrial complex by calling on private and public sectors to divest from abusive facilities. According to the International Labor Organization, under the 1930 Forced Labor Convention, number 29, forced labor is work undertaken involuntarily under the threat of menace or penalty. This applies to prison labor. So prison slavery is modern slavery and a global human rights issue that violates the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which ironically was chaired by the United States. So this is why we are partnering with Freedom United, and they're partnering with us, as well as Human Trafficking Search, to abolish slavery by demanding that states and the US Congress to close the punishment clause, as they call it, in state and federal constitutions, and amend this 13th Amendment as well. So we'll be giving you their links. You can see what's going on there and sign that petition. But the goal is to get involved. We are one big global family. We should not be subject to these conditions. And we should continue, as Mr. Williams was saying, to have this love, have this community, and feel embraced and safe and encourage and uplift one another. So we have some exciting words for you from Cornel West. And so we want to play those for you. But after that, we will conclude for the evening. So thank you guys so much for participating. We hope to see you again in the future through ABC and through our First Fridays and through the things that our partner orgs are doing. And we look forward to hearing from you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
I am so deeply blessed, honored, and privileged to play a small part, to raise my voice and be part of this historic virtual conference, the Quest for Democracy, Q4D. I want to thank my dear brother Troy. Oh, how exemplary he is in so many ways of being, in the language of John Coltrane, a force for good, a force for real good. And I think all of us stand in the great tradition of abolitionism, of Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, all the way up to Angela Davis, calling for what? Calling for an acknowledgement of the rich humanity of people, especially chocolate people, especially Black people, and saying there should not be in any form involuntary servitude, any form of bondage, any form of domination. We want to unleash human potential, unleash human possibility, unleash Black genius, and unleash Black talent. And it spills over to our vanilla brothers and sisters. It spills over to our brown brothers and sisters, our Latinos and Latinas, and our Asians, and our indigenous peoples, and our across the board, across the human board, as it were. So I want to salute each and every one of you who are already a vital part of this social movement. We're not talking about a nonprofit. We're talking about social motion, social momentum, and social movement, and using whatever institutional mechanism, be it nonprofit or whatever. But the end and aim is the empowerment of those the great Sly Stone called everyday people, the enablement of those the great James Cleveland called ordinary people. We want to ensure that that little moment in the 13th Amendment is called into question. Stay strong, stay steadfast, keep the love at the center of it, and know that there's freedom down the road. As Sister Angela says, freedom is a struggle, endless struggle, process as well as product, as well as end. And I want to say a direct word to my precious brothers and sisters making their way directly from the mass incarceration regime to mainstream society. One, that you've got a genius, a talent, you've got a wisdom, you've got a set of experiences that are rich. Always have confidence in yourself and believe in yourself in intervening, not just into society, but also into the movement to change society. Never forget you come from a great people, a people who've been hated for so long, but still dishing out love warriors, a people who've been terrorized so long, but still dishing out freedom fighters, a people who have been traumatized for so long, but still dishing out wounded healers. All of us have been wounded, but we use our wounds, we transform our wounds into being helpers and providers, and most importantly, joy spreaders. Never let anybody in any context steal your joy. So as you enter into society and enter into the movement to change society, use all of your talent, your experiences, and your joy to empower others, and know that you got something that the world can't take away, that's inside of your heart, mind, and soul, your rich memories that allow you to bounce back. And like my brother Troy, be a real force for good and for beauty and for justice and freedom. And put a smile on Curtis Mayfield and Aretha Franklin's face.
Hey, it must be my lucky day. I'm on the stage with Angela and got Cornell West calling out my name on his speech.
There ain't no luck involved, brother. You earned it.
You earned it.
I appreciate it. Appreciate you too. Appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Right. So family, don't let anyone steal your joy. I love it. So go out and be someone else's smile today if you can. Appreciate it. You guys take care.
All right, y'all. Stay strong, all right?